Hello BookTube, I'm Jonathan, and in my last couple of videos I've discussed some classic science fiction, so I thought it was time to review some modern science fiction. In today's video, I'm going to discuss some of my recent reads, let you know which was my favorite, and let you know what kind of readers I think might enjoy each of them. So let's get into it, starting with Annihilation by Jeff VanderMeer. The premise for Annihilation is that an area known as Area X has been cut off from the world for decades and has been reclaimed by nature. Different expeditions are put together in order to explore Area X, but all of them have come to both inexplicable and tragic endings. The book Annihilation follows the 12th expedition into Area X and is narrated by a biologist. They are joined by an anthropologist, a surveyor, and a psychologist, and they are tasked with exploring the secrets of Area X. I have watched the film adaptation of Annihilation, so I had a bit of an idea of what to expect, but it's a rather loose adaptation with quite a lot of differences between the two. However, one thing that they do share in common is a surreal atmosphere. Area X is an eerie place to be, and both the characters and us the readers are constantly trying to decipher what exactly is real as we attempt to unravel the hidden secrets of Area X. And one of the reasons I think this works well is because of Jeff VanderMeer's masterful prose. It can be a little dense at times, but it conveys an unsettling atmosphere that really helps to heighten the stakes of the story. The adventure into Area X reminded me a little bit of the journeys into the Zone in the book Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. And I'm not the only person to have noticed this connection, as I found a couple of Q&As with Jeff VanderMeer where people asked if that book was an influence on Annihilation, and he said that he hadn't actually read Roadside Picnic. So while it might not have been a direct influence, I still think it does share some elements that might make Annihilation worth picking up if you're a fan of Roadside Picnic. When it comes to the characters in Annihilation, they are somewhat guarded, but we do get to learn a little bit about them, the narrator most of all, and while I never felt like I grew particularly attached to the main character, I did find them to be three-dimensional with a couple of interesting qualities. The book provides some context for the expedition into Area X with some flashbacks, and while this does flesh out a little bit of backstory, I'm not sure I found any of these chapters quite as interesting as what was going on in Area X. I think my main issue with the book is that it poses many more questions than it provides answers. It's only a 200-page book, but it did feel like it took me quite a long time in order to get through, because as I was plodding my way through Area X, it didn't feel like it was giving me all that much back in return. I understand that this is the first book in a trilogy, but I just wanted a little bit more of a payoff for reaching the end of Annihilation. If you're not an overly plot-driven reader and you're just looking for a book to vibe to, then Annihilation provides a very particular vibe. It's dreamlike, it's creepy, it's haunting. For me, I enjoyed the experience, but I wanted the book to develop the plot and concepts just a little bit more. I'm somewhat reluctant to continue with the series because I've heard the sequels kind of continue in that vein, but let me know your thoughts if you have finished the series. In the end, Annihilation for me was a 7.5 out of 10. Up next, Semiosis by Sue Burke. Semiosis is the story of a small group of human colonists attempting to survive as they develop a society on an alien planet. However, waiting for them on this planet is an unfamiliar form of sentient life. Now, I picked up this book as I put together an impromptu vote on my Discord server for something to read this month, and if I'm being honest, I might not do that again, because this book did not really work for me. And the primary reason for that was the writing style. There's quite a lot of exposition and, in my opinion, non sequiturs. The dialogue can be a little bit awkward as there were a fair amount of exchanges that went along the lines of, and I'm oversimplifying here, but it's time for us to plant the crops. Yes, we just need to check the pH balance first. Are you still angry about your dead girlfriend? And I was like, whoa, that was abrupt. There might have been a smoother segue into that conversation. And it's just hard to get into a rhythm when it doesn't feel like the narrative flows from one thing into the next. Some of the story beats end very abruptly or just feel unresolved entirely. And something that could add to that is the fact that the book is told in 7 parts with time jumps between most of the parts. And that in and of itself I don't think is a bad thing, but a problem for me was that I didn't find all of the stories that satisfying in and of themselves, and I don't think they did a whole lot in order to elevate each other. It was only in the back half of the book where the connections between the stories were a little bit more clear, and I did start to enjoy those ones a little bit more. There's quite a lot of biological and botanical science in the book, especially in the first half, but I didn't feel like it was really driving the narrative. I like hard sci-fi where characters will encounter a weird science problem and then solve that with a clever science solution. In this book, I could tell that the science was really well researched, but it came across more as enhancing the descriptions as opposed to actually influencing the plot. There were some positives to take from the book. I thought the world building was rather well thought out, and its planet and flora and fauna were rather intriguing. And I did think there were some concepts and themes that were rather thought-provoking and I thought worth pursuing. The trouble is, I found it hard to connect even with the aspects that I enjoyed because I just did not jive with the prose. An analogy I thought of to try and explain this is that I love Bob Dylan. He's one of my favorite musical artists. I think he's great. But some people just don't like his singing voice. It doesn't bother me, but it is a little bit nasally. So while someone might be able to intellectually recognize that he's a great lyricist or he writes amazing melodies, they still can't enjoy his music because they simply just don't like the sound of his voice. And so I guess the prose in Semiosis for me was just the equivalent of being a little bit too nasally. And this might just be a me problem. This book received mostly positive comments in my Discord server. It has a pretty solid 3.91 rating on Goodreads, and it was nominated for some awards. So my suggestion to you would be to find a reading sample and give the first chapter a try, because I could tell in the first 10 to 20 pages that the writing style just wasn't really working for me. If you try the reading sample and the writing style doesn't bother you, then maybe you'll have a better time with it than I did. Ultimately, I think this book had a couple of interesting ideas, but I just didn't enjoy the execution. For me, this was a 4 out of 10. And lastly, we have Pushing Ice by Alastair Reynolds. In the year 2057, Bella Lind and her crew of the Rockhopper are responsible for mining comets. However, when one of Saturn's moons leaves its natural orbit, they are tasked with tracking it down. A mission which both the crew and humanity itself might not be prepared for. Alastair Reynolds is one of my favorite writers, and House of Suns is one of my favorite books, so the bar for Pushing Ice was pretty high. Initially, Reynolds does a great job of establishing the setting, the technology, and the mysterious behavior of the moon Janus. If you're not a hard sci-fi reader, it might feel like a lot to take in at first, but I think Reynolds does a good job of establishing the premise, providing you those details, but still moving the story along. As the book continues, the mission progresses a little slowly as the focus shifts to the interpersonal drama. Of the 7 Reynolds books that I've read, this is possibly the most character-focused, which, depending on your perspective, could be a good or bad thing. If you're a character-first reader, you might appreciate Reynolds taking the time to flesh out some of the personalities and conflicts between some of the main characters. If you're reading this book more for the sci-fi concepts, you might start getting a little impatient as you wait for Reynolds to reveal some of those big imaginative ideas that you know he's capable of. Personally, I landed somewhere in the middle. I don't think that character writing is Reynolds' primary strength, but I did appreciate the fact that when it came to the disputes, there would be times where I would agree with one character, and there were others where I would be on a different character's side. However, I did eventually grow a little tired of the drama, and I definitely started to like one of the main characters a lot more than the other. I think the second act of this book could have been trimmed down just a little. Fortunately, when it came to the second half of the book, Reynolds did deliver on those big sci-fi concepts with a hint of that cosmic horror that comes through in his Revelation Space series. I found the resolution of the book to be satisfying, although the ending didn't quite blow me away as much as House of Suns' redemption arc or Aversion. I enjoyed Pushing Ice quite a lot, but it didn't quite make it into my top tier of Reynolds books. For me, it was an 8 out of 10. So there you go, unfortunately no 5-star reads, but a couple of enjoyable books, with Pushing Ice being my favorite. I would recommend Annihilation if you're looking for a creepy vibey read, Pushing Ice if you're looking for some space opera and spaceship politicking, and Semiosis if you enjoy biology or botany. Just make sure to check out that reading sample first to make sure you connect with the writing style. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash or just gently click the subscribe button, and if you really enjoyed it, consider checking out the perks of becoming a Patreon member, where you can become one of my robots, androids, or cyborgs, like Nima, A New Eden, Half Ogre, Zakawe, and the Sentient Colin. And you can find more sci-fi content over here.